Hi, my name is Christoph Reichert. I'm with CBR Technology. We are a Microsoft certified partner in California. We specialize in the implementation of Business Central and Microsoft Dynamics 365 CRM, Sales Professional, Sales Enterprise modules, and of course the related technologies like Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Apps. And today I would like to go over the service management capabilities of the Business Central product. Business Central is offered by Microsoft in two flavors. One is the Business Central Essential line, and one is the premium product subscription. And the product subscription that you wish to use as a service management implementation client is the premium edition. So only premium edition contains the service management components. If you have essentials only, you will not see any of the features that I'm about to show you. Before we dive into the actual product, I wanted to actually go over an agenda of what I'd like to cover in this demonstration, specifically how to set up service items and what that entails in the solution, how you set up resources and configure time tracking options, go over some various related service management setups and configurations. We then walk through service contracts, which are optional in the module, as well as service quotes and service orders. And then finally, we'll talk about dispatching and reporting on the various data elements that are part of these submodules within the service management module itself. All right, with that having been said, let me dive into Business Central and start with the service item setup. So this is Business Central Premium Edition. I've opened a Kronos USA company. This is a sample company that you'll find is populated with Microsoft default information. I've modified this sample company to include service management records. The standard Kronos USA sample company does not come with the premium account for service management. So as a result of that, I ended up working on the sample data for you a bit in order to show you some of these capabilities more clearly. I will get back to the setup in a brief moment, but for the time being, I would like to start with the service item setup. So when you're looking through contractual information for a service item, you have service items, you have inventory items, and then you can get into customers and customer contacts. The system does provide service contract capabilities and service contract quote capabilities, which are, however, optional. You do not have to have a contract in order to process a service order or even a service quote. And then finally, of course, you do end up with service invoices and service credit memos, depending on what is going on. There is the ability to create contract service orders. So if you have a service contract and you wish to have a series of, let's say, maintenance service contracts that are based on a service contract in the system, you can do that with some routines in there. So this is for maintenance organizations that, let's say, go out every 3 months or every 6 months to service equipment and things of that nature. In the sample company here, I've taken the liberty to pick one of my favorite industries, which is the wine industry. And I'm going through the process of servicing the pieces of equipment necessary in the wine industry in order to demo this product for you. So in my service items section, I've started with 3 items that are installed at a winery called Winery to the Stars. And this particular winery has 3 production facilities, one in Paso, one in Sonoma, and one in Temecula. And they have this particular Eno Italia Jolly 25D stemmer product installed on all 3 locations. They only have 1 in each location, but they have a total of 3. And I would like to go over the setup of the service item with you so that you get a sense for what kind of capabilities the system has to track these individual service items. So this is a service item master listing of all the service items that we have in our database on the service module. As you can see, each service item is assigned to a particular customer, and in this particular case, even assigned to a particular ship to location. This is an optional part of the system. You do not have to track locations, but I would like to show you the module with the sophistication of multiple locations for each customer in your database. So this particular winery has 3 locations, one in Paso, Sonoma, and Temecula, and they have the same Eno Italia Jolly 25 in each one of the locations. And as such, I would like to track the service record and service maintenance records and so forth for each piece of equipment separately. So when you configure a service item, You have some core data, of course, which is an item number and a description, but you then also have the ability to link the service item to an original inventory item from the inventory database. So that's for companies that distribute and service equipment. So if I also sell the Italia Jolly 25 product, then it would allow me to transfer from a sale transaction into an ongoing service item automatically. Service item groups and service price groups are pretty obvious what they're for grouping and pricing mechanisms. Finally, I have a serial number that I'm tracking and the status of the service item, whether or not it's installed or temporarily out of service and things of that nature. Default response time, priority, warranty information with regards to parts and labor, and specifying a discount percentage that may apply under warranty services. Finally, there's a preferred resource that you can configure, and that would allow you to hard code or default a particular resource to servicing that particular piece of equipment. So in our sample situation here, I'm servicing the Italia equipment, and I have Susan working for me in Paso. And when the Winery to the Star calls about an issue with their destemmer and their Paso Robles location, Susan would be the go-to technician that would service this particular piece of equipment. Of course, there's customer core information and ship to information, and the address of the customer would be in here. There is contract linking capabilities that I'll go into a bit later, but this item could be covered by a service contract. In my case, I'm going to show this system to you without the contract sub capabilities, but they are also quite powerful with regards to the service items and service orders. I'm going to return back and start a service quotation for you so that you can see how the process could start from the beginning, starting with a quote as such. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate over to my service quotation. So a service quotation is obviously prior to a service order. So service quotations are typically in the order processing area of the system. So under order processing, after I set up my service item and other customer related information that we went over through briefly, I'm going to start with the service quote. So the service quote in here, I already have a couple in there, so Paso and Temecula location. But let's say I have another phone call from a winemaker in the Sonoma County location and facility, and now I would like to go ahead and schedule a call for that instance. So when I go ahead and do that process, I just start with a new transaction. The system will be assigning a service quotation number automatically. I simply grab the customer that I am selecting for this transaction, which is Winery to the Stars here. And then before I proceed further, I'm selecting the location from which they're calling as well. So under the ship to location, I have 3 locations identified, and I'm going to grab the Sonoma location for this particular quotation. Now, when I go to my service item details, you'll see that in this case, I only see the one service item that's actually at that particular location. So as I suggested earlier in the video, I made this more complicated in that I have 3 locations for the same customer. Of course, if you just have one location customer, you don't need to go through this extra layer of complexity. So in my case, there's 3 service items that are actually registered in the system for this particular customer, but the system knows that only this one item exists in that particular location, and that's the one that needs to be serviced. So I'm going to put this in here, and I have the item service item number and all the information automatically in here. I can automatically set response times and priority codes and things of that nature. You can have the item covered under a contract, and if you do use the contract, service contract, this would be completed in here, and that contract can specify many things as far as discounts or rates or different rates at lower rates, no fixed price contracts and things of that nature, all covered, and those type of capabilities are in the product. In my example here, I'm going to make this a non-contractually covered repair service that needs to be taking place. And under my service order types, which are custom definable, I'm going to say this is a repair that needs to happen. And I can make it high priority, low priority, and what have you. There's an assigned user capability as well. So if you have an internal team that handles all the paperwork and you have a service technician that handles the actual call, you can actually assign this transaction to a technician and to an assigned user internally for office management purposes. Now in my case here, I'm going to write a quote, and based on what the customer is telling me, I think there's a problem with the wheels and I need to send out a technician, I need to charge them time for mileage as well, and I probably need to charge the customer for a new wheel on this particular destemmer. So how do I do all of that? I go under my line options here, and there's something called the service item worksheet. The service item worksheet is allowing me to specify what I need to do in order to handle this problem that the customer contacted us about. So in my case here, I already know that I'm going to need to bring a resource out to handle this. So this is going out to Peter in Sonoma County, and I know that based on where Peter is located, we're going to need him to be out there for at least 8 hours in the day, and that has a certain rate associated with it. And then finally, I also know that Peter needs to travel to the site, and I suspect that that will be about 45 miles worth of travel. And then finally, I think I need to actually use an item that needs to be replaced. So I have a tie into my inventory database, and I have a spare wheel that's set up in here as an inventory item that is going to come off Peter's truck to be replaced. And let's say I need at least one of those wheels, and that would be my initial quote of what I think would be involved in taking care of this service. So go ahead and hit close. So all of that is related to the service item. And when I now go and say print, you'll see a default form, which of course can be customized in the environment to print a service quotation. So this is showing the address of the customer, the service address here, ship to address on the bottom, the status of the transaction, the quote number, and what have you. Right now this is doing some auto wrapping, so you see some of the text is disappearing, but again, this is completely customizable. And in here you would then see the service item in the top section, and then the service line items on the bottom section. So in my case, 8 hours of Peter's time, 45 miles of travel, and a spare wheel, all of that coming to $646, and this is what I'm quote the customer. So the next stage would be the customer would be accepting this quote and would like to proceed. So let me go ahead and show you the next steps here right away. So customer calls back and would like to proceed with our quotes, with our service quote. And all we need to do at this point is we go to process and we hit the make order button that will then take the quote and convert it into an order. So just going to confirm that that's really what we'd like to do, and we'll say yes, and the system will generate a service order that's based on the service quote. So in this little dialog window you see the original quote number, which was quote 1003, and it became order number service order 1000. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and as you can see, the quote is actually out of the system. So the quote no longer exists once the service order has been generated. So if I go to my service order listing now, you see the new service orders on file here, service order number 1000. Of course, all the information has been transferred, including the service item number, ship to addresses, and everything else we put on the quote. So this is the actual service order. And currently the release status is such that it has not been actually released. So this is a service order that is basically in the pending pile. So you can see the pending status right in here that is updated by the system automatically. And now you have some further information that you can put onto the order that may not be coming from the original quote. And you can make modifications to this also in the system as well. Now once you have the order in the system, you typically can do a dispatch. So the dispatch is a separate screen that I would like to show you under the planning and dispatching step, and we'll go into a dispatch board to take a look at that. Prior to doing that though, I'd like to point out that the service order doesn't have to start as a quotation. So some of our clients start with quotes, some of our clients just go straight to an order, and the only difference would be instead of doing a make order process on a sales service quote, you just go to the service order and start new from right in here, and that would just start a service order directly. Again, neither a quote nor an order have to be linked to a contract, but they can easily be linked if your organization decides to use that submodule within the service management setup. So at this stage, the Business Central module has a dispatching board in the system. However, this is a non-visual board scheduling tool. So one of our requests that we get frequently from our clients is, can't we do this visually, and how difficult is it to do that? So there's actually the ability to link the Business Central Service Management module to the Dynamics 365 service management module that is being published by Microsoft separately. And it has very sophisticated GPS tracking and visual dispatching tools that are part of that solution. A service order could be programmed in such a way that it just gets pushed through web services directly into the other Microsoft module, and that would allow you to use all of those functionalities out of this separate module if you like to do more visual integration with your service dispatch tools. Now in my case here, I only have a single service order in the system, so it shows it to me right away here. However, if you were doing this for a large organization, you would have the potential of filtering by zones. So for example, in my case here, I have 3 different zones for Northern, Central, and Southern California. So if I'm doing dispatching, I might look at service orders by zone. Of course, you can do it by customer. You could do by contract, type of contracts, and you have another number of other options as well as resource filters. So for example, if you can say, hey, I just want to see the Sonoma County transactions right now, and you can go through and do that. And in this case, I have nothing there, so it shows me nothing that needs to be looked at. But in my case here, I have this dispatch available. I can highlight it and just hit show documents. It goes directly into the actual transaction where I can continue to work on this if necessary. So I have a one-click modification capability. But you basically allocate it to a particular resource at this time, and you schedule it in terms of the time and the date when it's supposed to occur, and when this is supposed to happen. So there's a lot of options in here under resource allocations. Right now you can say, okay, I'm going to allocate this particular order to one of my technicians. So in my case, I have all of my technicians set up in here, and this was Peter in Sonoma, I believe. And you can allocate it for, let's say, tomorrow, and Peter is going to need at least 6 hours of his time to take care of this particular service order. So this is how you can allocate time, and you can do allocation on the service order here as well. So there's a lot of options surrounding the dispatching and the allocation of service orders to particular resources that you need to deploy in order to handle this service order. So finally, after the actual dispatch happens, there is obviously capabilities in the solution where you can interface with mobile devices. You can use Power Apps and other Power automated tools that Microsoft makes available and that are part of your Microsoft subscriptions typically, with which you can use mobile devices to actually track this and the status of this. And there's a number of ways you can, clock in and clock off service orders and service items and things of that nature. There is a timesheet capability in the solution. When you set up a resource, that can be configured on a resource level. So let's take a quick peek at the resource setup in the system so you can see what kind of capabilities you have. Let me just pull that up in here real quick. So on the resource setups, for example, for one of the sample folks I set up in here, Frank in Temecula, you see a unit price, a corporate overhead for benefits and such. And then finally, you have personal data that you can track for the person as well, such as their actual address, social security, level of education, and so forth. There is capacity tracking for employees in the system as well, or resources in the system as well. The reason why Microsoft uses a generic term called resource is because the system also manages to handle machines as well as people. And this would be if Frank had a special tool that he needed to have and use, and that tool had its own acquisition cost and fixed asset depreciation and what have you, and we needed to track that tool separately, we could certainly do that. Also, resources can be configured to track skills and resource locations. So those are 2 other additional important concepts. Frank could have a certification to work on, for example, wine equipment. So in this case, I set up Frank to have 2 levels of wine certifications, certification 1 and 2, and that could entitle him the privilege of working on certain high-end equipment that not everybody can work on. And on the dispatch board, you can go by skill codes to find service orders that require certain skills in order to service that piece of equipment. So the resources where you configure the skill codes, and you can also specify resource locations. So for example here, I can say, okay, Frank will be available at this location, and this is a link between a location and a resource, and this is typically used for service trucks and things of that nature. So Frank had a service truck, and in that service truck he had his own spare parts that were needed to service the equipment he's dealing with. There could be an automatic link between the location and Frank as a resource, so when you do adjustments and transactions, it will know automatically where the location and inventory is coming from. So that's resource configuration and allocation, obviously quite powerful. Generally speaking, the service management module is probably the most uniquely configurable module in the entire system. I would say service management and the manufacturing module would probably be on par with the levels of modifications you can do out of the box, and using a Microsoft certified partner that is well familiar with the service management module is really critical. There's lots of very competent folks working in general ledger and AR and AP and banking, what have you. But when it comes to service management, you really need to find somebody that is familiar with the service management tool itself. Although it is part of the Business Central solution, it does have its own configurations and setups that you need to configure correctly in order to deploy this module properly for your organization. Now, after the service orders have been dispatched, you would then go in and actually confirm the service item worksheets. And when you do that, you simply go back into the item worksheets here and specify actually all the things that happen. So on the quote, I put down 8, 45, and 1, as you saw me do earlier. And here would be now the opportunity to change that and say, you know what, yes, we scheduled 8 hours, but I only ended up taking 7 hours to do this. And I thought I was going to take this item here, but I really don't need this item, so let me delete this line item off this order. And of course, you could add back other things and things of that nature. So now I've made changes to the order. Just hit close out here, and I'm back to my order now. When I print the order at this point, you'll see that those changes will be reflected on my preview here. So let me pull this up here real quick. And of course, now this is a service order, not a service quote that we looked at earlier. But conceptually, this will have the same approach that we had on the quote. You have the service item and the service lines, and then a total charge. Obviously, it's now reduced because I'm not needing to sell the wheel as part of this repair. There is a very sophisticated option in here to track faults, fault codes, and resolution codes. Let me hide the fact box here real quick so you can see a little bit more information about this on the sample screen. So the fault codes and resolution codes are basically service tracking, where you can go back and say, you know what, historically speaking, we see a wheel fall off this particular destammer every 12 months. And to resolve it, we simply put a new wheel on there. So that could be a database tracker for common items you see. Obviously, no offense to Inno Italia, that I'm sure that doesn't happen, but that would be an example of what you can do here in fault code tracking and resolution code tracking. All right, so service orders are done and completed. When you then go and post that, it'll become a service invoice. It'll update inventory, it'll update general ledger, it'll update accounts receivable with all the appropriate information. And that's how you do a service order in the system. Coming back to order processing, you can also do service credit memos, which of course would be a reversal of the invoice. And the only other thing I want to point out to you is the loaner concept. So if you're in a business where maybe the destammer can't be repaired and you tend to take it back to your main office and you leave a destammer at the winery and say, hey, use this one for a while, you can actually set up a loaner. And on the service order itself, you can specify which customer has what loaner. You can charge for the loaner. You can do it as free of charge as part of the service. All of that can be configured in the software quite nicely. And then, of course, like I said, the service management module is fully tied into all of the other Business Central modules. So AR, AP, inventory, general ledger, and banking, and everything ties into one big solution. And the only other thing I'd like to point out to you is the contract tracking capabilities. So the service contract can be done as part of the service invoice, and it can generate service orders for like maintenance contracts and things of that nature. So there's a whole lot more to be talked about in service management. I was hoping to keep this video rather brief so that you get a good sense for what the module can do without overloading details in the demo. If you're interested, please give us a call at 855-227-0700. We'd love to start a conversation with you and your team about how to deploy Business Central Service Management module for your organization and how we can assist you with either data migration, training for your team, modifications and customizations to the system if necessary, and then of course integration with other Microsoft tools like Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and CRM module if interested in that area as well. Thanks for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to demo this product to you. Please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything we can help you with. Take care.